to the Inside the Ring podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, it is finally the three of us yet again. Chris and Jade, how are both of you doing today?
Fantastic.
Well,
Good.
that's good to hear. It seems like every week there's more and more to get through. And this week it's a lot, but also, I wouldn't say condensed, but most of the news has been the trade things, and the episode is appropriately named Trade Season. So without further ado, let's hear a word from our sponsor, DraftKings Sportsbook.
DraftKings Sportsbook is Boston's hometown sportsbook. It's live right here in Massachusetts. Bet local on all your favorite sports from the comfort of your own home with DraftKings. To celebrate, all new customers will receive up to $250 in bonus bets when you sign up for DraftKings Sportsbook using code ITR. You can now bet local on moneyline spreads, props, and more with one of America's top-rated sportsbooks. That's DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Sign up with the code ITR to get up to $250 in bonus bets to use. Now that mobile sports betting is live in Massachusetts, that's code ITR, and it's only at DraftKings Sportsbook.
If your loved one is experiencing problems with gambling, call 800-327-5050 or visit helplinema.org to speak with a trained specialist, free and confidentially 24/7. Must be 21 plus, physically present in Mass. Eligibility restrictions apply, subject to regulatory licensing requirements. Eligibility and deposit restrictions apply. Opt-in required. Bonus issued as free bets. Terms at DraftKings.com/MA.
It's always good to hear from the sponsor, and well, it's one of those weeks where it feels like heading into the Four Nations, there's a lot kind of circulating, and certainly in the trade world that's been the case. First, I just want to get on with this Marcus Pettersson trade first and foremost. It was kind of rumored, and it kind of ties into another trade. Vancouver and Pittsburgh, they make the trade. It involved a first-round pick and one of the top available defensemen in this year's trade deadline. It was one of those trades that made me kind of look at it, and I knew the Jets might be looking at him. There was a lot of people like Frank Saravalli. That was one of the top teams on his trade targets that Pettersson could go to. But Pettersson, as getting into the Canadian market and off of the trade bait board, it's one of those things that kind of allow. I don't know kind of what I'm getting at here, so I'm stumbling over my thought. But Pettersson is one of those. He was one of the more highly coveted players in this year's trade deadline. I don't know what you guys are thinking on Pettersson and the trade as a whole. So
I thought the trade was interesting when I saw it come through. Didn't realize Danton Heinen would be heading back to Pittsburgh as part of it. That was kind of surprising. Drew O'Connor. Did I mess up his first name? It is Drew O'Connor, right?
I think it's Drew O'Connor.
All right. So him going to Vancouver was also another piece that I didn't see. I mean, the trade came together, I think, at least I know I was asleep for it. So I woke up the next morning to all of the notifications from everybody. And obviously, as you do that, it's not the full trade. It's all piece by piece by piece. So I'm seeing it as that way. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, there's like 3 trades that happened while I was sleeping. What did I miss? And now, correct me if I'm wrong. The draft pick going to Pittsburgh is the pick that they got in the trade for JT Miller, which we'll get.
That is the pick, yes.
So
it was immediate, like they traded for it and then they flipped the pick because everybody.
So even with it being moved, it still stays unconditional, right? I mean, conditional.
I don't know exactly how that would work. I would assume that it would stay conditional, considering Vancouver acquired it as a conditional pick and then traded it away. So I'm sure that's something that has been cleared, but that's my assumption, is that it'll be traded as it was acquired. So, and with it kind of being all said and done, it's Vancouver, who needed help on the blue line. They get their help on the blue line with Pettersson. And I don't know if you've all seen all the memes going around in the hockey Twitter sphere of, oh, Pittsburgh needs to acquire all the Pedersons now. So that's just a funny little thing that I saw. But more trade targets get taken off the board, and that's Mikhail Granlund and Cody Ceci. And that was one that kind of surprised me, if I'm being completely honest.
Mm-hmm.
Granlund and Ceci packaged together, and I saw a few things saying that, oh, they'll go separate, but we all knew both players were going to get moved eventually. It was like they were one of the more highly coveted players, is trade bait boards and all. Like San Jose was going to be one of the biggest sellers at the deadline, without a doubt. And when you look at their roster, they could still be very active when it comes to trades. And I don't know, Chris, if you have any more names that you would say, but Granlund and Ceci packaged together, and the return that they got is actually pretty fair value.
That trade coming together as it did on Saturday, then Friedman said, I got more information that this was happening the night before. So that, to me, kind of seems like, they saw excuse me. They saw Vancouver making all the trades they were making. So they figured, let's go to another team that's not in the playoffs. Let's see what's available. And then pieces started to come together. There was, I forget his last name. I do remember his first name just because I remember the tweet was butchered. Lian, Lian, the prospect for the Stars. The Sharks apparently really wanted him, and Dallas said no, obviously. They ended up getting a first-round pick, and it's a fourth-round pick that becomes a third if Dallas makes the cup.
Makes the cup final, yes.
So, I mean, overall, that trade to me is a win-win for both teams. I think it makes the Sharks a lot better because obviously they're going to be able to draft another first-round pick. So they'll probably have a, I guess, his top 4 pick, depending on how the lottery is going to work this year, and another pick, obviously, in the late first round. So that will help them with the pieces they already have. And obviously, the Stars get Granlund and Ceci, which is 2 pieces they could very much need, especially with Sagan being out for who knows how long. So that's one of those trades when it came through that I looked at and I said, this works out for both sides.
Like when you say it works out for both sides, and I think Jade can also speak to this, is San Jose, like you said, they get their assets, but they also clear up necessary cap space if they want to go out in the summer and do what Chicago is doing and getting their young guys the necessary help who have veteran presence. Because we'll talk about this in a bit, but that salary cap, it's going up. And man, with the way that things are going to look, I think San Jose is going to weaponize that level of cap space that they are going to have. I don't know how much they have in the off season, but I know it's for sure a lot. And kind of speaking about the Blackhawks, they recalled one of their top prospects, Artem Levshinov. He's been doing really well in the AHL. I just have some very quick thoughts on this, but he's been doing really well in the AHL. I watched him with the Moose when he played against the Moose, and there's a reason he's getting recalled. It came out that he was recalled for a practice stint, but yeah, he came up. He's going to be practicing with the team and get that necessary experience while the AHL are in their All-Star break. So, and moving forward, finally to another trade, it's the Andrei Kuzmenko and Jacob Pelche trade. And I have opinions. Chris, I know you have opinions, but Jade, I also know you have some opinions, and it was a trade that shocked me. And how did it shock you? Unfortunately, Jade, we cannot hear you at the moment. So I'm going to pick it up from here. But Chris, my first reaction with the Andrei Kuzmenko trade, I was kind of taken aback. I don't know what your first thoughts were, Chris.
I was shocked. I mean, all the trades aside from, I think the JT Miller one, which we haven't talked about, we will shortly, but all of them were kind of surprising to me. And the pieces, I think you and I talked a little bit while the trade was coming through. As each piece came through, none of those guys were really rumored or mentioned about anything. Like Frost's name never really came out that he could be moved. Farabee, I was shocked that he was a part of that trade. And I can't remember the last time, not even trade deadline, but like a trade in general, where in the middle of a game players were being pulled.
Yeah, it's been a few years, last that I can remember. I know it's happened. I know it's happened in the last few years, like the last season or two, where it's a player who isn't one of the bigger names who gets pulled, but it's not every single game that a player gets pulled. So it interested
Multiple.
me. Multiple, yeah. And in this case, like Kuzmenko and Peltre, and then the return for Farabee and Morgan Frost. I know there's a lot of divided opinions on the trade as a whole from both fan bases, but it's going to be a trade that's really good in the long term of things because Kuzmenko and Michkov, I read something that they played together and they have a decent friendship. And Pelche, who was on waivers not too long ago, people are saying it's a throw in. I think it's more of he just needs a fresh change of scenery. And Jade, I don't know if you can agree with that or not, but
Can you guys hear me now?
yes.
Yep.
Okay, cool. I was trying to just use my AirPod microphone, and that's obviously not working. So
It happens.
yep. So I had heard Frost's name in trade rumors all season, even last summer. And that was him being moved didn't surprise me. What came more of a shock to me was Farabee, for a lot of different reasons. He has been, I don't know, that was a really big surprise. Given his involvement with the team and in the offseason, it's been said in a lot of different interviews that he, was kind of like a heart and soul kind of guy. Similarly to what people have said about JT Miller, but I don't know how I feel as somebody that, follows the Flyers and talks about the Flyers often. I don't know how I feel about the return. I think that having Kuzmenko with Michkov is going to be great, but I think they're both free agents at the end of the season, if I remember correctly, or one of them is a restricted free agent. I can't remember, but
Something
then
like
that adds in a whole nother layer that needs to be considered moving forward. And so I'm interested to see how this plays out. But yeah, I have a lot of feelings. I was at the Kraken game, pulling up to the Kraken game, and then at the game, trying to cover the game as the trade was breaking, and that was kind of a rough one for me. So,
well, I mean, I said this last week, but the whole Rantanen trade, which shocked everybody, and I'm just going to quickly go back to that. I was at the Jets game trying to cover that and do all that, so it feels like every time a big thing happens, a big trade has to kind of overshadow things. So,
yep.
And speaking of big things, and I kind of was talking about the salary cap stuff. We know the figures of the salary cap for the next 3 seasons, and there is margin for little increases or like higher increases. But next season, an increase of 7.5 million, followed by an 8.5 million increase in 26-27, and then 9.5 million in 27-28. We will see the NHL salary cap go from 95.5 million all the way to $113.5 million over the next 3 years. On screen, you can see the details, and This is, to me, it's very big because it creates a lot more flexibility, and for the players who sign long term, they're like, when they sign their next contracts, they're going to be looking at these like, hey, this went up and I signed long term. Then I can't say this for sure either, but I signed long term, then this is what I want, this is what I feel I'm worth. We're also going to see an influx of contracts of guys who might have been a $12 million player who might sign for more. It's going to create a lot of interesting discourse when it comes to how teams are built now, because with such a significant increase, almost $26 million increase in salary cap, like that's extra to spend. There's two things I want to consider, and Frank Saravalli brought up one really good point when it comes to the Canadian markets, and that's how are they going to make up for this additional revenue in the next 3 years that they're going to have to supplement, because the Canadian dollar being where it's at, and that's a whole economic thing at the moment. The Canadian dollar where it's at, if you're paid in Canadian dollars, it looks great, but how do you have this revenue? There's a lot of things to consider from that perspective. The second thing I want to bring up is how are teams going to, in the long term, and I'm also meaning the lower spending teams formerly like Arizona, teams who might not be in a competitive state right now, or teams who just might not be able to afford to spend all the way to the salary cap. And that's, how are they going to go through the years of a rebuild now and hit these lower limits as they are such significant increases? How are they going to meet those? And that's why I talked earlier about teams like San Jose maybe padding guys like Macklin, Celebrini, and all their top guys with veteran guys, and maybe paying them a little bit of a premium, because they know, like, hey, you guys are getting paid to come in and teach our young guys the game and have a good few years at the end here. Finally, with a projection of the cap increases, it was noted that these aren't projections or estimates, but it was merely an agreement between the NHL and the NHL's Players Association, which I find incredibly interesting, because now you have a massive jump. Are teams going to set an internal salary cap? Are they going to say, we don't want to spend this much, we want to have X amount of dollars for when the trade deadline hits, we have to do this? I don't say we as if I'm this big hockey executive, by the way. I should clarify that. It's a game of strategy now, because almost $26 million added in 3 years' time, like I said, it's a lot of money. And could you imagine a team like, say, the Anaheim Ducks or the Detroit Red Wings, who are in the odd phase of, are we still rebuilding or are we trying to be competitive? Are they going to go for it in the summer and maybe sign a big fish? Or are they going to teeter with the internal salary cap philosophy, which I've seen a lot of? Or are they going to add? Now, I just want to say, with the top teams like Edmonton, how do you use this additional cap space to add to your team? And now this is why I'm saying it throws a wrench into the way that we look at building teams. It's a whole new board. There's more teams kind of to play, more teams at play. It's like, I know the Winnipeg Jets have 42 point something million dollars in projected cap space, and that's a lot of cap space, but then you look at who they have to sign. That's another thing we got to consider here, but I'm going to wrap my thought up there. What do you two think about this salary cap increase?
I think it's going to end up I really kind of just echo your thoughts. I think it's going to make things a little bit difficult starting out. I do think it's going to make it a little bit easier to look at some of the contracts on teams that are, as people online say, like this player's being overpaid or whatever. I think it's going to make it a little bit easier to stomach some of those contracts, and kind of like, okay, you have this player that's maybe not performing to what their contract has been, but now the team has, money to go out and get somebody, not really to replace them, but to like maybe pad the line that they're on or pad the pairing that they're on or whatever, and maybe try to just make it a little bit better, I guess. So I'm interested to see how it plays out over the summer once the increase happens and all that, or next season. But yeah.
Another question that I have for the both of you is, with players like Mikko Rantanen and Mitch Marner available in free agency, could we see some really big moves? Like, if I'm Leon Draisaitl, he's still making $14 million a season next year. But could he be looking at the way that the salary cap increased and wishing that he would have waited a bit? Or do you think he's fine where he's at? Because we could see players making 17 million. Like, we're going to see a significant increase when it comes to player salaries.
I think that's going to be another kind of similar, if a player is really happy where they're at, even if they're not making the most. Draisaitl's a really good example of that. I don't see him leaving Edmonton personally. That's kind of my own opinion. Even if somebody did come in and offer him, 18 million, I just don't see him leaving.
I'm just referencing him because he signed for 14 million for the next 8 years. Yeah. Sorry about
I'm
that.
just saying, like, no, you're fine.
Yeah,
I'm also just kind of saying, like, a player like that's making that kind of money. I was kind of taking your reference and running with it a different direction.
Yeah, no, sorry about that.
No, you're fine. Mitch Marner, though, is one that I have read somewhere. I could not tell you where because it was like a week ago, and it's been rough. But I read that he is waiting until the off season to really focus on his contract. So that's another one that I don't know.
And
yeah, I do think that we see a spike in contracts, though.
The spike in contracts is something I also do see, but with kind of the Marner thing is, I've read a lot about internal rentals. I don't know what both of you have thought about teams having internal rentals when it comes to a pending UFA. But take a look at a team like Carolina last season. They didn't have very much cap space to work with this summer. They still built their team the way that they are now, but they lost a lot of good pieces, a lot of key veteran pieces that if they came back, they could have made another run. But I think with the way that the salary cap is kind of projected, you're going to start to see teams like Detroit and Ottawa and Buffalo who have been kind of struggling to get their footing, but have locked up their big guys. Like in Buffalo's case, you got Owen Power and Rasmus Dahlin locked up. A lot of good forwards locked up in Thompson and Dylan Cousins. You're going to see them really start to pack more players in there when they have the cap space and some really good contracts to complement their top guys. I think it's going to create for a very fun free agency, considering all these teams now have an extra $7.5 million to spend over the summer. And now kind of getting into the next point of things or back to the trade surface of things. And it was a very big trade, and it felt like it came out of nowhere, but we were all expecting it at the same time. And that's the JT Miller trade. He goes back to where he was drafted, the New York Rangers. He was traded for a first-round pick, Philip Chittle, and defensive prospect. I don't know the name off. Thank you, Chris. and he was traded with Eric Brandstrom and I think one more player or a pick. It was 3 pieces back and forth. Jackson Dorrington, and yeah, um, this is one of those. This is one of those trades that I know it's kind of underwhelming for some people, but when you look at the situation that Vancouver has been in for a while now, I've I saw something on Twitter, and it was one of the bigger media people saying it felt like an episode of Days of Our Lives. I had a good chuckle out of that comment, but the saga ends, and now we're at a point where Miller, he's in New York or back in New York, and he's actually performing quite well. Admittedly, he scored 3 goals, I think, since he's been traded. And I remember Chris and I were texting. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm just waiting for this to come through. If you want the piece, you can have it, or if not, I can grab it. Try to go home, but Chris, I what was your first reaction to this trade?
I mean, you and I, not even the texting, we talked about it a couple weeks ago where I just thought JT Miller to the Rangers made sense.
Yeah.
Now, the return, obviously didn't see it coming. I saw a lot of Rangers fans on Twitter not happy about giving up Mancini. And that's the only reason why I remembered his name, was I saw a lot of people excited about his game and what he could provide to the team, but obviously he's a part of it. It was interesting that they flipped, when we talked about it already, they flipped that pick right away. It was, a couple hours later, and that pick's on the move again. But overall, I think it makes the Rangers better. A team that had been hot is climbing back into the playoff picture. And honestly, I bet JT Miller to score a goal in that first game against the Bruins on Saturday. So I kind of wish I bet him to score 2 goals, but that is what it is. And I only did 1. But he looks like he fits back. Like, it's just the missing piece to that Rangers team, the way they played. I know they lost Saturday, but they won Sunday. He just looks like he's back home. And obviously there was the issues, whether you believe him or not, from what was being said in Vancouver with Pettersson. And, obviously his numbers seem to have dipped a little bit after all those rumors came out. And even though they all said, there's no issues, we're good. Now look what he's doing. So take with that what you will. But I like the trade. I like both sides. I like the trade. I think both teams look better. I mean, the Vancouver, they're still in a playoff spot. So even with the move of moving somebody like Miller, they're still fighting with the Flames. I think they're 2 points out entering tomorrow, Tuesday, because they're not playing tonight. So obviously they didn't make a big – they made a decent subtraction, but they still made a move to keep them in the fight for the playoff spot.
Yeah, well, and like the Pettersson trade, like I was saying, is it makes their decor just a lot better, but now you have to make up for Miller's production, because when he was in Vancouver, it's like 70 points his first season. He had 100 points in a 99-point season, so you're making up for a significant gap. And Jade, I don't like when it comes to the Miller trade, it's on the outside looking in. How do you see this trade unfold, and like what are you thinking?
It was not really a surprise to me. I guess the most shocking part was that they were trading JT Miller over Elias Pettersson. That was the biggest part of the trade that surprised me personally.
And I would say from the stance, like I was saying, is it's a big gap to fill in with the top scorer leaving.
Mm-hmm.
But you add that defensive piece. Now, does Vancouver, with all that cap space that they can utilize, Chris, I want you to chime in on this too, but do you see Vancouver using this additional cap space and what assets they do have on the team to maybe go out and get another top scorer at the deadline or before the deadline?
Well,
Maybe.
before the trade was made, there was reports that Besser was available. So are they possibly using him to dangle in more scoring from another team, maybe get 2 top 6 forwards if they can for somebody like Besser. And a team that I saw a lot talked about was the Kings. And obviously they came out, I think it was yesterday or the day before, that people were speculating Brant Clark was going to be a part of a trade. And so people were speculating that he would be a key part to the trade that could get Besser. Maybe they add a top forward. But obviously that's, from what it sounds like, isn't going to happen. And Clark is staying, and he's been back in the lineup as of late. But it will be interesting to see what they do. I don't think Pettersson's moving. I think that was said today that trade's kind of off the table now. But Besser is a name to watch. That hasn't been pulled back in or reeled back in from conversations. So it'd be interesting to see what they do with a piece like that, what they could bring in and what they could add.
The
Yeah.
Pedersen thing, they were talking about it on 32 Thoughts, and that was one that the way that I interpreted it was more of they're just going to wait until the summer to see with Pedersen. So,
Yeah, like
yeah.
the trade as a whole it's crazy, and there's so many layers to the JT Miller trade when you think, like, drafted with the Rangers, traded to Tampa, then Tampa trades him to Vancouver, and then Vancouver trades him back to the Rangers. So there's layers with that, layers with the whole Vancouver thing. But you don't see 100-point players get traded all that often. So, and that's kind of where I'm going to leave it for that one. But Ryan Hartman, seeing from a division rival and seeing what's kind of happened with Hartman, he's got an in-person hearing for a hit on Tim Stützle right off the face-off. I don't know if either one of you saw the clip, but he drove Tim Stützle's head into the ice.
Face first.
Yeah, face first, and Stützle's bloodied. Seeing what he's done previously to, again, a division rival and to just other teams in general, it doesn't surprise me that he's got an in-person hearing, considering how dirty of a player that he's been in the last few years. I don't know where the track record started, but I know it's been for a few years lately. When you look at the optics of it, and I know people were showing different camera angles and stuff they saw, you can't deny the fact that when Stützle went down, there was blood drawn, and he was looking incredibly woozy after the fact. There was a reason he was tossed for intent to injure. I don't want to play the guessing game, but if I want us all to give a number for how many games we think Hartman should get for this hit, because I'm thinking he's probably going to get less than 6, considering the way that the Department of Player Safety has kind of worked over the last few years. I think he's probably going to get 5 games for it. Chris?
I had 6. That was my guess.
Okay.
I don't even remember seeing that hit. What night was it?
I don't know off the top of my head.
I was going to say if it was Thursday or Friday. I was at the Kraken game and then dealing with the Flyers trade, and then Friday I was busy, so
Okay.
I don't remember. Yeah. I feel like maybe I saw it in passing. I have no idea, honestly.
Okay, all good. Chris, you were about to say?
It was Saturday night. It was in the
Okay.
6-0 game. And
I was asleep most of Saturday.
I saw a clip, and I don't know if it was from this year. I looked, the date that it was posted was this year, where he had I want to say almost kind of a dirty move as well on Draisaitl, where they were behind the goalie, and he kind of took Draisaitl's feet out from underneath him. And it looked a lot worse than probably it was, because obviously he didn't get suspended for that or have a call or anything. Which kind of leads me to, do they see clips like that and they go, yeah, 6 games. I know we haven't done a call, but this is what's been going on, especially based on the date I saw the clip. If that's roughly when it happened, I would say 6 games.
Yeah, like considering from my perspective is Hartman doesn't have a long history with suspensions, but also like there's a reason the Department of Player Safety reached out to him and said, "Hey, you're getting an in-person hearing for this hit." And for those of you who don't know what an in-person hearing is, it's just player has to go on Zoom instead of getting a phone call. It's a pretty simple difference that I feel like it isn't. I don't feel like it's kind of told a lot more or as much as it could be. When it comes to this hit, I'm thinking 5 games, and the next time the Minnesota Wild and the Ottawa Senators play, it is going to be a very interesting game for Ryan Hartman. It'll be a game kind of circled on a lot of people's calendars. And I know we're getting into February, so that could even be next season, with all things considered. And speaking of hits and players hitting players, Stefan Nason hits Tage Thompson high, and no Sabre on the ice stood up for Thompson. That's an interesting hit, and it's defending your teammates is a pretty integral part of the game, Chris.
And no call either. So he's not getting a call from what I saw today from the league office.
Yeah.
So there's no reprimanding him for the hit. But to me, it was just mind-blowing that you watch a hit like that in that magnitude in open ice and not a single Sabres player comes over to the defense of their teammate.
And did you see the post-game comments where Lindy Ruff was saying there was guys on the ice who would have went for it and all that?
But they didn't.
Yeah. And then other players, like veteran players, were saying the same thing. And it's like, are you guys realizing? Like, I don't remember which player it was, but it was one of the few interviews after the game. And he was saying we didn't see you hit Thompson. That's why nobody reacted.
I don't know how you miss it, but
and considering the next hit we're going to talk about, it was pretty apparent who hit Thompson by the way he's looking around the ice, ready to go if he needs to go. Because with the way the game of hockey has changed, even in the last 4 or 5 years, if you lay a big hit like that open ice, 9 times out of 10, you're going to have to fight about it. And that was the 1 time out of 10 a guy didn't have to fight about it. I'm on board with you don't need to fight after every big, clean hit. I'm not saying it was a clean hit either. It looked a little high. But that's also a hit where you just got to defend your teammate, regardless of who's getting what and who's hurt and who's not. And if you look at the Pietrangelo hit, kind of shifting gear, but if you're looking at Pietrangelo, he gets blown up. And Vegas immediately was all, which player was it that hit him? Chris,
yeah, it was, I forget how to say his last name. He just got the one from the JT Miller trade.
Chittle?
Chittle. Thank you. Jeez. Yeah, it was Chittle.
Yeah. So pretty simple thing. Vegas, no questions asked. Like, Pietrangelo is one of their leaders. I'm pretty sure he's wearing an alternate captain's crest on his jersey, but he's one of your blocker, like one of your integral guys on your team. And a big hit like that, Vegas is like, hey, we're not having that. Don't be running around and hitting our guys like that. And so they made Chittle fight. Where in Buffalo's case, a moment like that is arguably season ending because you're not showing any bite. You're not showing any fight when it comes to your top guys getting hit. And Tage Thompson just a few years ago had a massive scoring outburst. He's making Buffalo one of Buffalo's top salaries. Wow, that was a tongue twister for me. But I think it goes without saying, just defend your teammates. And Jade, I think you see this from the press box, is big hits, defend your guys,
Yeah.
right?
You would hope. You would think.
Yeah. And considering Thompson being, like I said, one of Buffalo's top guys,
Mm-hmm.
you would think there was at least a scrum out of it.
Yeah.
So that,
I think about that sometimes with the Kraken. Also, there'll be times where there's a pretty nasty hit and then everybody just goes about their business as normal, and every so often I'm like, what are you guys doing? Why are you not sticking up for each other? What is going on here? But it's gone a little bit better. But yeah, I have the same thought sometimes watching games with, like, why are you not defending your teammates?
yeah. And Chris alluded to it with what he was saying about Department of Player Safety, but the NHL Department of Player Safety won't issue any supplemental discipline for Stefan Nason's hit on Tage Thompson. And it was, admittedly, I'm not surprised given it was a hit and nothing happened. But also, when you look at the angles and you consider Nason is like 6'3", 6'4", Thompson is 6'7", so he's taller than Nason, but he still got hit. He got rocked. I don't see why this hit would warrant any sort of supplemental discipline. Like, if one of you have a disagreement, go for it. But I don't see why it would warrant a player getting suspended in this case.
Nope.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
Like, it was a good hit. It was a good hard hit that had no response from the team. And like I said, it could be a season ender. And I want to move on to this last point, and this last topic that we got here. It's a team that has battled back the last 2 years, or a year and a half, I guess, just battled into where they are and have fought through a lot of adversity as a team, and they're in a playoff spot for a reason, and that's the Detroit Red Wings. So, Chris, I see the smile on your face.
We're back, baby. I'm so excited. This team, since December 29th, has been so much fun to watch. Obviously, they let go of Derek Lalonde not long before that. It might have been a game before that. I believe the 29th was the Capitals game, so I want to say right before that was the Leafs, where that was his first game, and Todd McClellan came in, and he said right away, I just want to see this team play. I'm not going to address anything right away. He watched them play against the Leafs, and they got blown out. I believe it was 5-2 was the final. They held a practice, then things changed. He figured it out. They looked a lot better. And, I mean, since December 29th, just for numbers, wrong piece of paper in front of me, they are 14-3-1, and they have moved into the top wildcard spot in the Eastern Conference as of right now.
And they're sitting 1 point
They're
behind.
currently tied. Yeah, right 1 point behind Ottawa for third.
Yeah.
And they're tied with Columbus, and they have – the tough part is Tampa, I believe, has 2 games in hand, sitting behind them by 1 point. Those two play on Saturday.
Yeah, Tampa had a rough January. And like you said, Tampa and Detroit play Saturday, so that could be the deciding of who goes where and whatnot, because right now is a very crucial time where points matter all year, obviously, but when you have games between teams who are fighting for wild card spots, that's where it starts. It's like a little bit more of an emphasis, and I think that if Detroit can start to pull ahead and get a bit of a little gap, we could be seeing a different team come the end of the month and seeing more of a better structure for playoffs. And who knows, they could even jump into that third Atlantic spot where Ottawa is sitting at the moment.
They could. And the big thing, I wrote about this, I think it was last week, they started this 4-game road trip. They had to play Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver. Calgary and Vancouver were back-to-back, and they still got Seattle on Tuesday. But in the article, I said that if they come home with a minimum of 5 points, that game against Tampa might be the biggest game to this point of the season. So far, they've got 6 points. They play the Kraken tomorrow night in Seattle. And if they can come away from 2 points from there, and depending upon what Tampa does, if Tampa loses in regulation, they have a 3-point lead where that game doesn't mean as much, but it also means that you could put Tampa 5 points back. I don't know if Tampa plays on Thursday, but you have the potential to put Tampa at least 5 points, or at most, I guess, 5 points back, which is, like I said, it just proves to be a huge game. The Bruins have had their struggles. You know, the other team that worries me is the Rangers, and we've talked about that before we logged on, Conrad. But realistically, right now, you're seeing a whole different team offensively. Since December 29th, they're averaging 3.45 goals per game. In the last, so they've won 6 straight. This is the second straight win streak of at least 6 games. The first one was 7, and they lost to the Sharks. And now in this last 6-game stretch, they're averaging 3.33 goals per game, while only giving up 1.5 goals per game. The goaltending has been, it's Cam Talbot. I mean, Talbot got reunited with his head coach from LA, and since McClellan took over, Talbot's 9-1-0.
Yeah.
It's right in the back of Cam Talbot in the offense. And another name is Alex DeBrincat. Since that span, 17 points. And so 17 points in 18 games. Casper's another one. He's fit right in on the top line, playing with Dylan Larkin and Lucas Raymond. So, and obviously they just got Patrick Kane back last night against Vancouver in another game that, from what I saw, I fell asleep during it. But I saw a lot of people on Twitter saying that's a game you don't win. And they come away with 2 points. I mean, they got lucky from what it seemed like to come away with 1 point going to overtime. But then that beautiful play with Raymond and DeBrincat. I mean, everybody on the ice thought Raymond was going to shoot that puck in overtime. And he just found DeBrincat in the corner, and he snuck it right in. And it was a great win. Now here they are in a playoff spot. And if you asked me in the beginning of December if I thought the team was in the playoffs, I would have said no. It got to the point where I was not going to watch games for a little while. I was going to watch everybody else and see what was going on. Now, if they're on, it's must-watch TV. And I love the way that they play, where it seems that's the mindset of Todd McClellan has the first of 3 wins the game. And he said that he's preached it since he got to Detroit. And what was it? I think it was the other night I was watching. They were down 2-0 in the first period. And a lot of people on Twitter were saying, this game's over, this game's over. And I replied to a bunch of them, said, it's first of 3. We're not done yet. And all of a sudden, I believe it was the Edmonton game. And right away, they had 2 goals in the second period. They kept the Oilers from scoring in the third, and they went to overtime and picked up the win. So, and they won 3-2. The only game I believe in the 6-game stretch that they didn't win with 3 goals scored was the 2-0 shutout to Tampa Bay a couple weeks before.
Yeah. A lot of good points, actually, Chris. And I didn't realize that. I actually kind of forgot about the first of 3 goals thing that McClellan's kind of preached. But the one thing I wanted to bring up, and that's a wild card race, because it's wide open, but also not. And we were kind of alluding to it with Tampa having 2 games in hand and just where they're sitting as a team and the slide that they've had. But when you look at the order of Tampa Bay, Boston, the Islanders, the Rangers, and the Montreal Canadiens, the Rangers, we've said, are the biggest threat to take a wild card spot from either Detroit or Columbus. But when you look at teams like Boston, who have made the playoffs off of rosters that might not have made it in certain years, they could have that late season resurgence when it matters. And it's teams like Tampa who also have that veteran coach and those veteran players, like they have that experience. So there's got to be a little bit of doubt in the minds of teams like Detroit who haven't made the playoffs in quite some time. So it's going to be a very interesting playoff race, that's for sure. And I think that's where we're going to leave it this week. It's been a good one.
I got a bold statement.
We can
leave it with this bold statement.
Okay.
At the end of the month, at the end of February, the Red Wings play Thursday and Saturday at back-to-back home and home with the Blue Jackets. If
Oh,
either one of those teams win both games, that team's making the playoffs.
I don't think that's as bold as you think it is.
Mm-mm.
I think so more because people don't see the Red Wings making the playoffs, even though they've been hot.
This might sound a little bit more bold considering what the wild card is looking like, but I think the Red Wings have a better chance than the Blue Jackets at the moment, even though they're both currently in a playoff spot. So, like you said, Chris, we'll end it on that hot take. So it was nice getting to join you, the both of you this week, and thank you all for listening to the 24th episode of the Inside the Ring podcast. Have a good night.